Well, good morning and welcome to lesson 33 of A Course in Miracles, using the White Edition, available on Amazon or BookPod or anywhere like that. Just Google it. So lesson 33, there is another way of looking at the world, right? Which is good news, because the way that the world appears to me and the way that I see the world now is nothing short of horrific, with war and pestilence and disease and domination and all that sort of thing, and coercion and all of these agendas that seem to be playing out in the world, which constantly are reflecting back to me my own inability to reconcile my position in relationship to an ever-changing landscape, right? And what I'm looking for in here, in my heart, in my empty space inside, is something that is solid, something that I can count upon, and something that is my birthright, I guess, if you want to call it that, imbued within me in my creation, as part of creation itself, because God is everything, and therefore that must include me, include you, and also include the nature of the physical realm we see around us, albeit that is illusion, right? So there is another way of looking at the world, and I've got a nice little story that I'll tell you in conjunction with this one. There's a couple of people written to me saying, I like the little stories that you tell along the way. And I'm thinking, I wonder if they're helpful or if I should just straight do the lesson, because it's the lesson that's the important part. But if you find the story helps to relate you to the lesson, I guess, in a certain sense, then that's fine. So there is another way of looking at the world, lesson 33. Today's idea is an attempt to recognize that you can shift your perception of the world in both its outer and inner aspects. A full 5 minutes should be devoted to the morning and evening application. In these practice periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find profitable, and that's where I'm going to have a little chinwag about. Anyone who doesn't know what a chinwag is in Australia, it means to have a chat, have a chinwag. In these practice periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find profitable, though unhurried applications are essential. Alternate between surveying your outer and inner perceptions, but without an abrupt sense of shifting. Merely glance casually around the world you perceive as outside yourself, then close your eyes and survey your inner thoughts with equal casualness. Try to remain equally uninvolved in both, and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day. Try to remain equally uninvolved in both, and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day. And one of the things that I like to often do when I find myself in new situations, or seemingly new situations that haven't appeared for me before, in new company or in a new particular location, is to imagine me watching myself as this physical thing from up behind here somewhere, and including myself, that is in observance of the situation, into my appreciation of the whole scenario that's being played out, right? I'm detached from it. I'm not defending this thing. I'm just looking at the whole situation, including the avatar into it, as nothing more than, let's say, my probe or my senses that are trying to tell me what it is that I'm about in that particular situation, even though I have an experience in my mind that is already telling me that the entirety of the situation is false, right? But I'm not going to use that experience I've had, and I'm not going to use that understanding that the world is an illusion and that the entirety of my situation I find myself in is false, as a defense against allowing myself to feel or to include in whatever emotionality or whatever kind of triggers or things that situation might bring up in me. Can you hear that? Because those moments, you're never anywhere for no reason, right? And those moments wherein I'm watching my state of mind for anything that's tempting me to go left or right, yin or yang, rather than stay here in inner peace, right? I'm watching my mind. I'm being vigilant for my peace so that in that situation I can see where it is that I want to wander. And it's always a deliberate attempt to wander off. So when I'm watching the situation or being observant of the situation from right back here, rather than participating in an attack and defense mode, which is what the human being does. It's always looking out for its own best interests and fuck everybody else, basically. And mosquitoes, then I can be honest about how I'm feeling in the situation. If I have a vested interest in it, if I'm just here and defending my identity, then I'm not in a neutral, or I'm not in a what did he say here? A detached position, right? So try to remain equally uninvolved in both and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day. The shorter exercise periods should be as frequent as possible. Specific applications of today's ideas should also be made immediately when any situation arises which tempts you to become disturbed. For these applications say, there is another way of looking at this. Remember to apply today's idea the instant you are aware of distress. It may be necessary to take a minute or so to sit quietly and repeat the idea to yourself several times. Closing your eyes will probably help in this form of application. Okay, so, and I just wanted to talk, and that's pretty self-explanatory. We've done that in the last few lessons in a very similar fashion. But where he says here, where Jesus says, in these practical periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find profitable, right? And I just want to relate to a little story once when I was at a healing centre where I attended for some years in New South Wales, and my teacher Ted was giving a talk that day about something. I forget the entirety of it. His talks usually went on for a few hours, but I remember him specifically saying, just in a general to the class, to the group manner, that as a human being, you don't ask for enough. You should ask for everything. You're entitled to everything because of what you are. And we have this limited sense of self. Oh, I'm probably not worthy of the entirety of the grace of God, But he was pushing for us to ask in its entirety for more. Ask for everything. And I had already had the experience of my enlightenment in 97, which was a couple of years before, and then had some subsequent experiences which made more sense of that to me over the following years, the couple of years. And I was sitting at the side of the room on a little table stand that we had there at the time, and I used to play the music for the light meditation, and that was one of my regular things that I did, and in the little DJ box. And I was sitting there considering my own position in relationship to what he just said, and I thought to myself, is there more? And so I asked within myself, Jesus, I want more. I want more. I demand it, and I asked for more. And I heard this voice say to me, what more could you possibly want? And it was as if somebody was standing right beside me, and I heard that voice many times, but and I said, I don't really know. And then the voice replied to me, well, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. And then, that wasn't the one I wanted to talk about. And yes it is. And at the end, sit back, relax, enjoy the ride. And then he said, there is nothing to worry about, right? There is nothing to worry about on the end. And I remember thinking to myself, at the time, I was kind of worried about a few things. It wasn't so much about, is there more, but there were other things going on for me in my particulars that were sort of like I had no money. I felt kind of unworthy being at the centre for so long and not being able to contribute financially, but there were a lot of other people there in the same boat as me, because the area was very depressed for working, and I only had a 2-day-a-week job and unemployment benefits. Things like that was going on. And so I remember I made a decision that if Jesus told me there's nothing to worry about, that I was going to apply that. And where he said in the lesson here, I've lost it now, but 33, should be repeated as often as you find profitable. I remember I made a decision for some reason to repeat that there is nothing to worry about 100 times to myself, right? And I sat there on that table with my eyes closed and I repeated it to myself. There is nothing to worry about. There is nothing to worry about, just in my head. And as a kind of a mantra, I guess. And then as I got to about the 60th repetition, I remember a distinct feeling of calm coming over me. It was as if I finally heard it. As if I finally heard myself say, Dave, there's nothing to worry about. You know, and I was washed with this kind of calm. And I finished 100 repetitions. And I remember thinking that the same thing with lesson 1, nothing I see means anything. And how many times I'd read that lesson, heard that lesson spoken about, seen that lesson written on the board for the day and things like that. And how many times people had mentioned it to me. And to put it into context, this is how hard it is to hear anything spiritual. This is how difficult your ego wants to make it, to draw a curtain over the idea of reading these concepts and principles and actually hearing them, right? So one day we're at the healing center. I was at the healing center, which you would imagine for a spiritual healing center would be a peaceful and calm place, but not always so, because it's a place where people come together to undo their egos. And there's a lot of energy going on, and a lot of people often clash in ideas, not so much physically, but in ideas. And but this one day I was walking out the back to have my lunch, and there was about 30 or 40 others out there eating, and 2 people were having a go at each other, and it got kind of physically violent, pushing and pulling and name calling and all of this thing. And suddenly I was mortified. I thought, what is going on here? Like that. And one of my other teachers, Greta, who was standing at the doorway watching with a sense of disconnection, as you know, detachment. I said to Greta, what does this mean? Like that. And she just said to me, she was a Dutch woman, she said, lesson number 1. And it just popped into my head. Nothing I see means anything. And all of a sudden the lights went on. The light bulb just went bing. And I was so grateful for those 2 guys out there having that argument. So grateful for everything. And finally I heard that lesson. It went in. Nothing I see means anything. I can choose to engage in it, choose to make up a story, choose to allow myself to be emotionally stirred and interactive with this in the world that's going on around me, or I can choose to maintain my inner peace and represent something that does away with the necessity to solve conflict in that kind of way in its entirety. So, yeah, interesting stories, I guess. You can read about them in my book, Truth from the Top Down by Dave Fair. Shameless self-promoter. All right, I love you. And just remember, it's all a dream. You've got to laugh. You can't take it seriously, including this. Don't take it seriously. Just apply it, let it do what it needs to do, and then forget about it. All right, bye.